Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're jumping right into one of the most vibrant and honestly exciting corners of the sake world. We're talking about namazake, the living sake. It's fresh, it's delicate, and believe me, it's an experience all its own. So, have you ever been looking at a sake bottle or a menu and seen this character right here? It's pronounced nama, and it literally means raw or living. But what does that actually mean for the sake inside the bottle? Well, that is exactly what we are going to unpack today. Okay, let's get right into it. The entire identity of namazake, what makes it so special, really hinges on a single crucial step in the production process. Or more accurately, the lack of that step. It's this fundamental fork in the road that separates it from pretty much all other sake out there. And that step is called haire. Now, haire is basically a gentle pasteurization. Most sake gets heated to about 60 to 65 degrees Celsius. This does two super important things. First, it stops the enzymes that would otherwise just keep changing the flavor. And second, it kills off any unwanted microbes, like this one particularly nasty bacteria that can spoil the sake. So at its core, haire is what makes a sake stable and reliable. And, this chart really lays it all out perfectly. You can see standard sake gets pasteurized twice. Then you have these kind of half-raw styles. Namazume gets heated once before storage, and namachozo gets heated once just before bottling. But look all the way down at the bottom. There's namazake. It completely skips both heating steps. Zero. Zilch. It goes straight from the press into the bottle in its pure, raw, living state. So, we know it skips the heating step, but what does that actually do to the taste? Well, this is where the magic of namazake really comes alive. It's a night and day difference. Think about it like this. Pasteurized sake is often described as mellow, stable, and rounded. The flavors have had time to settle down. Namazake, on the other hand, is all about that fresh, vibrant, youthful energy. And often, you'll get this thing called gaskan, a slight, totally delightful fizz on your tongue. That's just the natural carbon dioxide from fermentation that hasn't been heated away. It's fantastic. The best way I've ever heard it described is with this apple analogy, and it's just perfect. Namazake is like biting into a crisp, fresh, raw apple. It's juicy, bright, and just bursting with life. Pasteurized sake, or haire sake, is more like a mellow, cooked apple compote. The flavors are deeper, they're softer, more integrated. Both are delicious, right? But they're two completely different experiences. Now, because namazake is a living thing, you absolutely cannot treat it like other sake. All that beautiful vitality comes with a catch. It's fragile. So if you bring a bottle home, you've got to know the 3 golden rules of storage to protect that amazing character. And to understand how to care for it, you just have to know what its enemies are. Since all those enzymes and yeast are still active, it is incredibly sensitive to its environment. Its 3 mortal enemies are heat, light, and air. Simple as that. And that brings us to the 3 big rules. And trust me, they are non-negotiable. First, you have to always keep it in the fridge, even before you open it. Second, you've got to protect it from all light. That means sunlight, even the fluorescent lights in your kitchen. And third, once it's open, drink it fresh. This is not a bottle you want to let sit around for weeks. Let's really zero in on that first rule. How cold is cold enough? Well, the magic number you're aiming for at home is 5 degrees Celsius. That's about 41 degrees Fahrenheit, or even a little colder. If it gets any warmer, those little enzymes and microbes start to wake up, and they can create some really funky, undesirable flavors. Your standard fridge will do the trick, but remember, colder is always better. Okay, so let's get super practical for a second. To block out that pesky light, just keep the bottle in its box if it came with one, or even wrap it in some newspaper. Always store it standing up. That minimizes how much of the sake is touching the air inside the bottle. And this one is crucial. Put it in the back of your fridge, not in the door. The temperature in the door swings up and down every time you open it, and namazake hates that. Once you do open it, really try to finish it within a few days to get that peak freshness. All right, so now we know how to take care of it. Let's talk about one of the most incredible things about namazake. Those amazing fruity aromas. How in the world does something made from rice end up smelling like a basket of fresh apples and bananas? Well, these incredible scents actually have a name, jinjo-ka, or jinjo aroma. And they aren't added flavors or anything like that. They're actually complex chemical compounds that are created entirely by the sake yeast itself. It all happens during a very slow, very cold fermentation process. It's this meticulous brewing that coaxes these gorgeous scents out of simple rice and water. And what's so cool is that we can actually pinpoint the science here. We can name these compounds. One of the absolute stars of the show is something called ethyl caprate. This is an ester that the yeast produces, and our brain just happens to interpret it as the wonderful scent of green apples or fresh pineapple. Then you've got its partner in crime, isoamyl acetate. This compound is the one that gives off those delicious aromas of banana and sometimes melon. So the specific balance of these two compounds, which is all dictated by the yeast strain and the brewer's incredible skill, is what creates the unique aromatic fingerprint of each sake. And get this, the science just keeps getting cooler. Brewers and scientists are constantly developing new yeast strains. Recently, they've cultivated yeasts that can produce a compound called 4-MMP, which gives off these incredible, elegant aromas of lychee and muscat grapes. It just goes to show you how much deep science is behind this ancient craft. But the story of aroma doesn't just stop with fresh fruit. It's a dynamic world that changes over time, which brings us to what happens when sake ages, and, on the flip side, the dreaded off flavors. So, we've been talking all about freshness, right? But what happens when you age sake on purpose? Well, you enter a totally different universe of aromas. As sake ages, chemical changes, like the famous Maillard reaction, transform those bright fruity notes into these rich, deep scents of caramel, nuts, and dried fruit. And with really long aging, you can even get these wild, savory, complex aromas of soy sauce and spices. But here's the flip side. Because namazake is so fragile, if you don't store it right, you get unintentional and usually pretty unpleasant changes called off flavors. A really common one is called nama hineka, which has this kind of scorched, nutty smell. It's the direct result of storing the sake too warm, and it is the #1 reason why you have to keep your namazake cold. But that begs a really interesting question, doesn't it? Can something that's technically a flaw actually add character? You know, in the super complex world of aroma, the line between a fault and a feature can sometimes get a little blurry. A tiny trace of a compound that might be awful in large amounts could, in just the right balance, add a layer of depth and personality that makes a sake even more interesting. It's all about balance. All right, I know that was a ton of information, so let's boil it all down real quick. Here's what you need to remember. Nama simply means unpasteurized. It's a living sake. Its taste is all about being fresh and vibrant. For storage, think cold, dark, and quick. And all those incredible fruity aromas, they're a gift from the yeast. At the end of the day, namazake offers this amazing snapshot of sake in its purest, most energetic form. Yeah, it requires a little extra care, but the reward is a taste experience that is truly unlike anything else. So now that you know all its secrets, the only question left is, which living sake are you going to discover first?